The arrival. The silence between them hung heavily in the air. Lyrena stood still, the weight of her words settling between them like a storm cloud. She could feel Marcus's gaze upon her, intense and searching, yet there was something else there, something unfamiliar, perhaps curiosity, or a spark of recognition. But Lyrena knew that he was still trying to process the impossible truth she had just shared. "I didn't expect this," Marcus finally said, his voice low. He rubbed a hand over his face, clearly in disbelief. I thought we were talking about something entirely different." She lowered her gaze to the ground for a moment, then looked back at him. "I know it sounds unbelievable," she said softly, "but it is true. I am carrying a child. Your child." The room felt suddenly colder, though the air inside was still warm. Lyrena shivered slightly as her mind reeled from the weight of her own confession. This was no longer just a mission. This wasn't just about the questions and the study of humans. This was something far more personal. She had never imagined that this moment would come. She had always thought that her journey among the humans would be one of observation, of understanding. But the truth was far more complicated. Her bond with the human she had met online, Marcus, had deepened over time, even though they had never physically met. Their communications, shared thoughts, ideas, and emotions had led to something she hadn't anticipated, a connection. For weeks, she had been feeling something stir within her, something that could not be ignored. And then, on one fateful night, a quiet but undeniable signal came. A new message from Marcus, one that changed everything. In it, he had revealed a desire to meet her, to connect in a way that no message or transmission could achieve. It was at that moment that Lyrena had made her decision. She would meet him in person, no matter the consequences. The journey to this small colony world had been long and fraught with uncertainty, but it had felt necessary. She had to meet him. She had to understand this strange force between them. And now that she was here, standing before him, it was all so real, too real to ignore. Marcus took a tentative step forward, his eyes still studying her. But how? His words were cautious, trying to make sense of what she had just revealed. "How is it possible that you're carrying my child? You're not human. You're different," Lyrena finished for him, her voice a whisper. "Yes, I am different, but in some ways, we are the same. I am capable of love. I am capable of carrying life, just as you are. This child is a symbol of that connection, of the bond between us." Marcus's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, drawn to her despite the confusion that still clouded his mind. The closer he got, the more Lyrena could feel the pull between them. An invisible thread that connected them in a way no words could truly express. "I don't understand," Marcus admitted, his voice almost lost in the space between them. "But I want to. I want to understand." Lyrena's heart skipped a beat. There was no fear in his voice, no rejection. There was only the willingness to try, to reach beyond what was familiar and embrace the unknown. "I knew this would be difficult to explain," Lyrena said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I came here because I need your help. This child is unlike anything either of us has ever known. It carries within it the potential for both our species. It could change everything." Marcus frowned, trying to process her words. "Change everything? How? What do you mean?" She sighed, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the room. "I mean that this child represents the future. It could be the first step toward true understanding, toward cooperation between our kinds. I believe it could be the bridge that connects us, not just as two species, but as sentient beings capable of mutual respect." Her words hung in the air, a quiet challenge to everything Marcus had ever known. He had never considered such a possibility before. The idea of a future where humans and aliens coexisted, where their differences didn't tear them apart, but instead brought them together, seemed impossible. But the sincerity in Lyrena's voice was undeniable. She wasn't asking for his help out of obligation. She was asking because she believed. No, she knew that this was the only way forward. "What will happen to you?" Marcus asked quietly, his gaze searching her face. "And the child?" Lyrena looked away, her gaze shifting toward the window. She could see the stars through the glass, distant, cold, and indifferent. But in their vastness, there was also a promise of infinite possibilities. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what the future holds for me, for us. But I know this. The child is safe, and I will do whatever it takes to protect it, to make sure it has the chance to grow and learn." Her heart felt heavy with the uncertainty of it all. She was carrying more than just a child. She was carrying the future of two worlds, two species that had never before crossed paths in such a way. And as she stood in that small, dimly lit room with Marcus, she realized that everything she had known up until now, everything she had studied, everything she had believed, was about to change. "Will you help me?" Lyrena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Will you stand with me for this child, for the future?" Marcus stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing the gravity of her request. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I will help you, whatever it takes." Lyrena felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since she had arrived on this strange world, she felt as though she wasn't alone. Together, they would face the unknown. Together, they would build something new, something greater than themselves. And as the stars outside twinkled, Lyrena allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. The journey was just beginning. A fragile connection. The warmth of Marcus's response lingered in the air, like a promise that reached deep into Lyrena's chest. For a moment, she simply stood there, her violet eyes locked on his, searching for any sign of doubt. But there was none. He had said it. He would help her. And with that simple declaration, an enormous weight was lifted from her shoulders. She felt, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she had found a place, someone who saw her, not as an alien or an outsider, but as a being with her own hopes, her own dreams, her own mission. For all the vastness of the universe and the distance between her world and his, Marcus's words had bridged that gap in ways she never could have imagined. He wasn't just agreeing to help her. He was agreeing to stand beside her, to confront the unknown together. I didn't know what I was expecting," Lyrena said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as the reality of it all began to settle in. "But this, your willingness to help, it means everything. You've given me something I thought I had lost forever. Hope." Marcus stepped closer, and she could feel the air shift around them as he did. He didn't say anything right away, his eyes searching her face with a curiosity that seemed deeper than just the physical. It was as though he was trying to understand something about her, something intangible, and perhaps, in the process, understand something about himself too. "We don't know what lies ahead," he said finally, his voice steady but thoughtful. "But I think we're about to find out." His words hung in the room like a challenge, urging them both to confront the uncertainty that lay before them. Lyrena nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: it would be nothing like what they had known before. The paths they had once walked alone were now intertwining, creating a journey neither of them could predict. "I've traveled far to get here," Lyrena continued, her gaze drifting toward the small window once again. "I've lived with this secret for so long, kept it hidden from those who might never understand. But now I have no choice but to face it. This child, this life within me, it is a part of both our worlds. It is the bridge between everything we know, everything we've ever believed." Marcus watched her as she spoke, his expression a mixture of admiration and wariness. "It's hard to imagine," he said, running a hand through his dark hair. "I mean, I've heard stories about alien species and intergalactic diplomacy, but this feels different. This feels real." Lyrena smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "It is real," she said quietly. in every way that matters. There was a brief moment of silence, one that felt longer than it should have. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice softer this time. "Tell me more," he said. "Tell me about this child, about the connection. What does it mean for us, for both our species?" Lyrena took a deep breath and turned back toward him, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and trepidation. This wasn't just about her and Marcus anymore. This was about something much bigger. This was about the future of two worlds, about the potential to change the course of history. She had already made the decision to carry this child, to protect it. But now, she understood that the child's future was no longer just her responsibility. It was their responsibility. "I didn't choose this," Lyrena began, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "At least, not in the way you might think. When I first began my studies of humans, I was only fascinated by your resilience, your capacity for emotion. I never intended to become involved. But as I spent more time learning about you, hearing your stories, watching your struggles, I found myself drawn to you in ways I couldn't explain. And when I came into contact with Marcus, I was already beginning to understand that perhaps there was something more here than I had ever realized." Marcus listened intently, his gaze unwavering. "So this connection, it's not something you planned?" he asked gently. "No," Lyrena replied. "It wasn't. But it's real. And it's more than just a bond between you and me. It's a bond that could transcend the boundaries of our worlds. The child I carry is the proof of that. It carries within it a blend of our two species, something never before seen. And I believe that it has the potential to change everything." Marcus nodded slowly, his brow furrowing in thought. "What do you mean by change everything?" Lyrena paused, her mind racing. There was so much to explain, so much she could say. But how could she make him understand the full weight of what she was carrying, what they were carrying? "Humanity is at a crossroads," she said after a long moment. "You've made great strides, but you still struggle with your differences. There are still those who view the unknown with fear, who see anything outside of their own species as a threat. I've seen this in your history. It's part of your nature to fear the unknown. But this child, it could be the key to overcoming that fear. It could show both our species that we are not so different after all." Marcus was quiet for a long time, his gaze focused on her, as if trying to understand the depth of what she was saying. Finally, he spoke, his voice tinged with a new sense of determination. "And you believe that this child is the first step toward that change?" he asked, his tone soft but resolute. "I do," Lyrena answered. "I believe that if we can show both our species that unity is possible, that love and cooperation are not just ideals, but tangible realities, then perhaps we can build something new, something that transcends the divisions of our past." The silence that followed was thick with possibility. Lyrena could feel the weight of her words sink into the very fabric of the room. This was more than just a personal mission. This was the beginning of something monumental, something that could ripple across the stars and shift the very foundation of what it meant to be human or alien. Marcus stood still for a moment, processing everything she had said. His expression was thoughtful, his eyes distant as he seemed to be contemplating the vastness of the idea Lyrena had presented to him. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I'm with you," he said, his voice firm. "We'll face this together. We'll make sure that this child, your child, has the chance to show both our worlds what is possible." And just like that, Lyrena knew that this journey was no longer hers alone. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, side by side, as allies, as partners. And perhaps, just perhaps, the future would be brighter for it. A new kind of family. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also with an undeniable sense of purpose. Lyrena and Marcus, once strangers to one another, now stood united by a common goal, a bond forged not just by the child she carried, but by the deep, unspoken understanding that their meeting was no accident. Lyrena had come to Earth seeking answers, hoping to find some clarity about the strange pull she felt toward humanity. She had spent years observing their triumphs and their failures, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment when she realized that her connection to one human in particular, Marcus, was more profound than anything she had anticipated. She had always considered herself an outsider, a mere observer of the universe's complexities. But now she found herself standing on the precipice of a new reality. She had a family, one that was not bound by traditional norms or familiar boundaries. She had Marcus, and soon she would have a child who represented a future of unity, hope, and change. But the weight of this responsibility was immense, and it wasn't lost on either of them. Marcus spent long hours with her, learning as much as he could about her people, her culture, and the world from which she came. In turn, Lorena immersed herself in humanity's history, studying their evolution, their triumphs, and their many failures. The deeper she went into the human experience, the more she realized how much they shared. Their capacity for love, for growth, for redemption, was something that resonated deeply with her. But there were also darker truths, things she had not fully grasped during her studies. The deep divisions, the prejudices, the fear that often guided human actions, these were the things she feared would stand in the way of the future she hoped to build with Marcus and their child. The child, who was already growing stronger within her, was a symbol of both their species' potential and their deep, inherent flaws. One evening, as the two of them sat in the small cabin overlooking the desolate landscape of the colony world, Marcus spoke up. He had been quiet for most of the day, his thoughts clearly far away. "Lorena," he began, his voice low, as if testing the weight of his own words. "I've been thinking, we can't just hide here forever. If we want this child to have a chance, we need to go to the places that matter. We need to make sure people, both humans and aliens, understand what we're doing, what it means. We can't live in the shadows." Lorena turned to him, the glow of the setting sun reflecting off her silver-blue skin. "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "But the world is not ready for us. We can't just announce ourselves to the galaxy. It's too dangerous." Marcus's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? I thought you said the child was the key to everything. Isn't that why you came here?" "I did come for that reason," Lorena said softly. "But there are forces, powerful ones, that won't look kindly on this. There are those who fear what we represent, the union of two species. And there are others who might see our child as a threat. The universe is vast, and not all of it is filled with the same hope that we feel." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense. "So what do we do? Do we just hide away forever?" "No," Lorena said, shaking her head. "We fight for what we believe in. We fight for the child. But we do it carefully. We have to choose our allies wisely, and we need to be prepared for those who will oppose us. I can protect us, but there's only so much I can do alone. We need to be strong together." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression serious. "We'll find a way. We have to." In the following weeks, they began to plan. They knew that the child's arrival would change everything, but they also knew that they couldn't rush into the galaxy without preparation. The risks were high, but the potential rewards were even higher. As Lorena and Marcus worked together, their bond deepened. What had begun as a simple connection between two beings from different worlds had evolved into something far more profound. They were partners now, not just in the sense of their shared mission, but in every possible way. There was a tenderness between them, an unspoken understanding that transcended language and culture. Lorena marveled at how easily she had come to trust him. She had never expected to form such a connection with a human, let alone a male human. But there was something about Marcus that spoke to her soul. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. And that in itself was enough. They would often spend long hours talking about the future, the kind of future they wanted to build, not just for their child, but for all the beings of the galaxy. They dreamed of a time when species would come together, not in war or fear, but in unity and cooperation. It was a dream that felt far-fetched, even impossible, but it was one that gave them both hope. Meanwhile, the child continued to grow inside Lyrena. She could feel the tiny life kicking within her, a gentle reminder of the responsibility she now carried. Sometimes, late at night, she would place a hand on her abdomen and close her eyes, imagining what the child would become, what it could become. Would it be like Marcus? Would it inherit the same resilience, the same courage, or would it take after her, with her alien heritage and strange ways of thinking? Lyrena didn't know, but she was determined to find out. And whatever path the child chose, she knew that they would be there to support it, to guide it, to love it. One day, as Lyrena walked through the dusty streets of the colony, feeling the warm breeze on her skin, she thought about what Marcus had said. We need to make sure people understand what we're doing. It was a sobering thought, but it was true. The child they were bringing into the world was not just a symbol of their love. It was a symbol of something far greater. Chance for change, a chance for growth, a chance for a future that was different from the one they had known. It was a chance to show both their worlds that unity was possible. And if they succeeded, perhaps the universe would finally be ready to embrace the hope that they held. As the day drew to a close, and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Lyrena looked up at the stars. She couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of anticipation. She had come to this world searching for answers. But in the end, she realized she wasn't just seeking answers, she was creating them. And the journey ahead would be one that would change everything. The burden of truth. The days were growing longer, and with them, the stakes seemed to rise. Lyrena and Marcus had begun to prepare for the next stage of their journey, the part that would lead them beyond the small, isolated colony. They had laid the groundwork for their plans, but there was something intangible that lingered in the back of their minds, something that neither could ignore. They had always known that the road ahead would be difficult, but the full weight of their decision was only beginning to sink in. One evening, as they sat together in the dimly lit cabin, Lyrena could sense the tension in the air. It wasn't the tension of fear, it was something deeper. It was the kind of tension that came from knowing they were about to step into a reality that was entirely new. Everything they had been planning for was about to unfold, and the unknown stretched out before them like an endless horizon. "I've been thinking about what you said," Marcus began, his voice quiet, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. "About the dangers of showing the world our child, about the forces that could turn against us." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "I think we need to be prepared, Lyrena. The more I think about it, the more I realize how high the stakes are. We can't just be passive. We have to take action, but we have to be strategic." Lyrena nodded, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the table. "You're right," she said softly. "We have to be prepared for those who will oppose us, for those who will see this child as a threat. And we also have to remember that not all humans will be as open-minded as you have been." She swallowed hard, the weight of the truth settling in her chest. This child represents everything humanity has the potential to become, but it also represents everything they fear. It's going to take more than just hope to see this through. Marcus's gaze softened, his eyes meeting hers. "I know," he said quietly, "but I think we're ready. We've made it this far, and we have something no one can take away from us. The truth." The truth. It was a word that had become both their shield and their sword. It was the truth of who they were, the truth of what they had come to understand about each other. But it was also a truth that held dangers of its own, a truth that could either open doors or slam them shut. The reality of their situation was that the universe wasn't kind to those who dared to defy convention. And though Marcus had always believed in humanity's potential for greatness, even he couldn't ignore the shadows that lurked just beyond the light. As they continued to talk, the plans began to take shape. The child, this symbol of hope, of unity, would be born, but they would have to take every step carefully. They knew that they couldn't just stay hidden in the outskirts of civilization. If they were to truly make a difference, they would need to go to the heart of the issue, to the places where decisions were made, to the leaders and organizations that could either help them or destroy them. The journey ahead would require allies, human and alien alike. It wasn't just about their survival. It was about making a stand for something greater than themselves. It was about showing both species that it was possible to coexist, to build something new from the ashes of the past. It was about proving that the future didn't have to be defined by old fears and misconceptions. One of the hardest parts of their plan, however, was the reality that they couldn't keep the truth of their child's origins a secret forever. There would come a time when they would have to reveal everything: who Lorena was, where she came from, and how the child had come to be. The implications were profound, and not all of them would be positive. There were factions within humanity that feared alien influence, that saw outsiders as enemies. The child they were carrying, half human and half alien, would not be easily accepted by everyone. The question now was how to manage the inevitable fallout. How could they protect their child and ensure its future without igniting a firestorm of conflict? "We need to find the right people," Lorena said, her voice steady but full of determination. "People who can help us spread the message, people who can see beyond the surface. We can't fight this fight alone. We need those who will stand with us when the truth comes out." Marcus nodded, his brow furrowing in thought. "I know a few people who might be willing to help," he said slowly. "But it's not going to be easy. There are a lot of powerful forces out there that won't hesitate to crush us. We're asking for a lot. We're asking for change on a scale that most people can't even begin to comprehend." Lorena looked at him, her violet eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "We'll take it one step at a time. But we have to be ready. If we're going to fight for this child's future, we have to be ready to face the challenges ahead. We can't run from this. This is our responsibility now." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words settling into the quiet space around them. Outside, the wind howled through the barren landscape, a stark reminder of the isolation they had chosen. But inside, in the small cabin that had become their home, there was a sense of unity, a sense that, despite everything, they were not alone. As the days turned into weeks, Lorena and Marcus continued to prepare. They knew that the time was coming when they would have to take the next step. The child was growing stronger within her, and the world beyond their secluded colony was waiting. They couldn't hide forever. In the quiet of the night, as Lorena lay awake, she thought about the child, this precious, fragile life that had the potential to change everything. It was a symbol of hope, but also a beacon for danger. The child was a reminder that nothing was ever easy, that every victory came with its own set of challenges. But it was also a reminder that they were capable of more than they had ever realized. Humans and aliens, two vastly different species, had the power to create something extraordinary, and that power was within their reach. Lorena reached down and placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the faint stirrings of life within her. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "We're ready. We'll fight for you. For all of us." And as the stars outside the cabin flickered, Lorena felt a sense of peace settle over her. They were ready for whatever the future held. Together, they would face it. The weight of a dream, the dawn of their new reality, was upon them. The days of hiding, of retreating into the shadows, were now behind them. Lorena and Marcus had made their decision. It was time to take the next step. Their plans were laid out. Their resolve was stronger than ever. But the truth, hard and unyielding, remained a constant presence, always lurking just beneath the surface. Lorena's pregnancy had progressed, and with it, the stakes seemed to rise higher each day. The child within her was no longer just a symbol of hope. It had become a beacon for the future. But that beacon also drew attention. Some of it welcome, most of it not. The time to reveal everything had arrived. The small cabin, where they had spent so many quiet moments together, now felt like a weight, its walls closing in on them as they prepared for what was to come. The space outside, vast and endless, beckoned them towards something greater. But with that freedom came the burden of the unknown. a challenge neither of them could fully comprehend. As they stood side by side, looking out over the barren, alien landscape, Marcus spoke first. His voice was thick with the kind of resolve that only came after deep reflection. "We can't go back," he said. "There's no turning around now." Lorena nodded. "No, there's no going back. Not for us. Not for this child." A small shiver ran through her as she spoke the words, and it wasn't just the cold, the alien air, or the unknown future that caused it. It was the weight of what they were about to do. They had made their choice to reveal the truth, to step out into the galaxy and let everyone know that they were carrying a child who was not just human, but also something else. A hybrid. A future that could bring two worlds together, or tear them apart. "We're going to have to start reaching out to people," Marcus continued, his voice determined but tinged with the same uncertainty Lorena felt. "We'll need allies, people who won't be swayed by fear. There are organizations, politicians, and groups we can trust, but there are others who will try to shut us down, who will see this as an abomination. We have to be ready for that." Lorena's violet eyes locked onto his. "We have no choice but to be ready. If we want a future for this child, we have to show the galaxy that we are not enemies. We have to make them see that this child is a sign of what can be possible. The future we want isn't a world of fear and hatred. It's one of unity, of understanding." The idea of unity was a powerful one, and one that burned in both of their hearts. But Lorena knew all too well that achieving it would be no easy task. As much as humanity had the potential for greatness, it also had a long history of war, division, and distrust. The fear of the unknown was deeply ingrained in them, and an alien child, one who was half human, half alien, would be seen as the epitome of that unknown. It could be their salvation, or their destruction. Marcus was already thinking ahead, as always. "We'll start by reaching out to those who are open-minded, those who have fought for peace before. The ones who understand that humanity's greatest strength lies in cooperation, and will need to be strategic. This has to be done carefully, or it could backfire." Lorena's mind raced. She had never imagined that revealing herself, revealing them, would come with so many complications. In her heart, she believed in the potential for peace, for cooperation, but reality often had a way of shattering ideals. Still, the child inside her was a constant reminder that there was something worth fighting for. "We'll need a plan," she said firmly. "We can't just go charging into the heart of everything unprepared. We need to find a way to make them listen. Not just hear us, but understand. This child represents something that could change the very fabric of this galaxy, and we cannot allow it to be dismissed as a mistake." Marcus looked at her, a fire in his eyes. "Then let's make them see. Let's make sure they understand. We'll fight for the future." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. Lorena and Marcus contacted trusted individuals, people with influence, with power. They reached out to politicians, scholars, and advocates for peaceful relations with alien species. Some were willing to listen. Some already understood the potential of a united future. Others were skeptical, and a few outright hostile. Each conversation brought its own challenges. Each interaction was a step toward the uncertain future that loomed ahead. But there was something growing within Lorena, something that had begun to take shape as she spoke with these individuals, as she fought for her child's future. She had always been an observer of humanity, an outsider looking in. But now she realized that she was becoming something else, something more. She was becoming a leader, a voice for a cause far greater than herself. Every ally they found brought a renewed sense of purpose. These were the people who could help them in the fight ahead, who could spread the message, who could stand with them when the world turned against them. But they knew that not everyone would be so understanding. Fear, as always, would rear its ugly head. The moment came when they could no longer stay in the shadows. They had to take the next step. The truth of the child, of their union, had to be revealed to the world. It wasn't just a decision for them anymore. It was a decision for all of humanity and all alien species who might one day look at them and see hope instead of fear. The media was the first battleground. With their carefully chosen allies, they released the news to the public, broadcasting it to the stars, spreading the word through every available channel. Lyrena could feel the world shift as the news rippled across the galaxy. The hybrid child was real. The impossible had come to pass, and now there was no going back. As the news spread, reactions were mixed. Some were fascinated, intrigued by the possibilities. Others were horrified, terrified by the very idea that an alien might be carrying a human child. The initial responses ranged from curiosity to outrage. The human world was never going to be the same again. Lyrena and Marcus knew this would be the hardest part of their journey. This moment when they had to face the truth of the galaxy's reaction. It would not be easy. They had hoped for the best, but they had prepared for the worst, and they would not stop fighting for the future they believed in. They stood together as the media storm continued around them, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had done. But despite the fear, despite the chaos, Lyrena felt something inside her shift, a sense of purpose, a sense of unity. They had done it. The truth was out, and now they would face the consequences together. As the first waves of anger and confusion swept through the galaxy, Lyrena and Marcus looked at each other, knowing that their fight had just begun. But they were no longer afraid. They were no longer alone. Together, they would face whatever came next. The shifting tides. The world, or rather, the galaxy, was in upheaval. News of the hybrid child, the child that was part human and part alien, had spread like wildfire, igniting reactions ranging from fascination to fear, from hope to outright hostility. Lyrena and Marcus stood at the heart of this storm, knowing that the true battle for the future was only beginning. The first few days after the broadcast were a whirlwind of media coverage. Some news outlets hailed it as a monumental moment in history, an unprecedented opportunity for peace and unity between species. Others, however, seized upon it with fear and revulsion, calling it an abomination, a threat to humanity. Politicians, scientists, religious leaders, and even alien diplomats began to weigh in, each with their own opinions, each with their own agenda. Lyrena and Marcus had anticipated some of this backlash. What they hadn't expected, however, was the intensity of the public divide. It was as if the entire universe had been split into two camps, those who saw the hybrid child as a symbol of hope, and those who saw it as a harbinger of doom. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Marcus said quietly one night, as the two of them sat in the small cabin, watching the news coverage on a screen that flickered with images of protests, debates, and interviews. "But I didn't think it would tear people apart like this." Lyrena's gaze was fixed on the screen, her violet eyes reflecting the chaos unfolding in front of them. "I underestimated the fear," she admitted. "I thought that once the truth was out, people would begin to see the possibilities, the potential for unity. But fear runs deep, Marcus. And fear doesn't listen to reason." The protests had already begun. On Earth, the most vocal and organized groups were pushing back against the idea of interspecies union, decrying it as unnatural, a violation of human purity. There were rallies, some peaceful, others violent. The voices of those who had hoped for a peaceful future felt drowned out by the loudest, most fearful ones. In the far reaches of space, some alien factions viewed the child as a threat to the balance of the galaxy, an invasion disguised as peace. They questioned the wisdom of allowing the human and alien hybrid to exist, let alone thrive. They saw it as a symbol of weakness, of a dangerous blending of species that would dilute their own identities. "It's not just the humans who fear this," Lyrena murmured, more to herself than to Marcus. "There are aliens who fear us too. The purity of their species, their cultures. They're afraid of losing everything." Marcus looked over at her, his brow furrowing in concern. "So what do we do? Do we keep pushing forward, even when the whole galaxy is trying to tear us apart?" Lyrena sighed deeply, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "We do what we've always done, Marcus. We fight. We fight for this child. For a future that can be better than the one we're all running from. We can't give in to fear. We have to show them what's possible. We can't let the loudest voices dictate our future." But the task was daunting, and neither of them could deny it. The rift between those who embraced the idea of unity and those who resisted it seemed to widen by the day. The child's very existence had become a battleground, and neither Lorena nor Marcus could predict how the war of ideas would unfold. The media coverage had sparked a renewed interest in alien-human relations, but it also painted them as outsiders in both worlds. Humans weren't sure whether to embrace the idea of an alien child among them or to reject it entirely. And the alien worlds were divided in their stance, with some calling for immediate intervention to prevent what they considered an infringement upon the natural order of their species. Weeks passed, and the protests intensified. There were violent clashes between those who supported the hybrid child and those who didn't. As much as Lorena and Marcus hoped for a peaceful resolution, it became increasingly clear that the fear and hatred within the galaxy would take time to overcome. One day, as they watched a particularly heated debate on a broadcast, Marcus turned to Lorena, his face grim. "It's not just about the child anymore, is it? It's about everything we've been fighting for. Our future, our place in this universe. The child is just the beginning. If we're going to win this fight, we're going to have to change people's hearts. We have to show them that we're not the enemy." Lorena nodded slowly, her mind racing. "We're not just fighting for peace. We're fighting for understanding, for acceptance. And that's going to take time. It's going to take more than just showing the world that the child is safe. It's going to take showing them that we, humans, and aliens alike, can coexist." It was a fight that would test their resolve, their unity, and their belief in the impossible. And yet, despite the mounting pressure and the uncertainty that surrounded them, Lorena could not help but feel a small ember of hope flicker within her. There were still those who saw the potential for something greater. There were still those who believed in unity, in peace. And slowly, they began to find them. Those who would stand by them. Those who believed in the future they envisioned. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. One evening, as Lorena and Marcus walked through the colony, they met a small group of people who had come together, despite the public outcry, to offer their support. They were mostly scientists, philosophers, and a few politicians who had long advocated for peaceful coexistence between species. They had been following Lorena's journey, and they were willing to fight for her cause, even if it meant facing the wrath of those who would oppose them. "This is just the beginning," one of the scientists, a human named Dr. Elias Hargrove, said as he shook Lorena's hand. "The galaxy is full of division, yes, but it's also full of those who want to see change. People who see this child not as a threat, but as a sign of what we can become." Lorena's heart swelled with gratitude, but she knew it was just a small step forward. There was still so much to be done. The child was still seen as a symbol of fear, and there would be many more battles to fight. But for the first time in weeks, Lorena felt a glimmer of optimism. Perhaps this fight wouldn't be as impossible as she had once thought. They had allies now. The tide was beginning to shift. And though the path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty, they knew that as long as they stood together, they had a chance to change the future, a chance to prove that unity, despite all odds, was worth fighting for.